I recently figured out how to improve at Fortnite so fast it genuinely feels illegal. You know that feeling of spending days grinding and practicing only to end up getting the same placements as that one friend that hops on once a week? It makes you feel like you're washed and like you're wasting your time. But today we're actually going to change that. I will show you how to do this, why you need to do it, and the consequences of not doing this. Now I know that scrims and practicing can be exhausting and boring, which only makes you want to procrastinate even more from actually doing them. But you're not actually the problem. It's the dumb and inefficient way that you have been practicing which is causing you to struggle to improve. In this video, I'll show you how to spend just 20% of your time practicing and still place highly when it comes round to a tournament using these 5 key tips I'm going to share with you. Okay, so starting off my first tip, I want to talk about mastering building and editing consistently. So starting off, I want to talk about what I'm going to call the 80% rule. Now there's multiple different sections which make up a consistent editor and builder within Fortnite. This could be, for example, edit timing, crosshair placement, piece control, and other factors that all tie in. Now instead of just focusing all your time into mastering each particular one of these skills one by one, I want to promote my new idea, which is that you only need to be around 80 to 90% of the way to mastering a skill before you actually move on and learn another one. Because you see, if you spend too much time focusing on one skill, such as perfecting your crosshair placement, you may neglect another skill like improving your piece control. It's more important to be better at a wide variety of skills to a decent standard instead of just one single skill to the level of mastery. Now I do have some tips to help you guys improve your editing and building consistency, such as the tips that I'm about to share with you. So you can look at practicing like drills, for example, and you should spend time in creative mode practicing high-speed building techniques. Now this could be examples like 90s, tunneling, retakes, boxing up, stuff like that, you know that. And you want to focus on consistently executing these under pressure. Now if you're looking for some maps to improve your mechanics, I'm going to list off a few right here. We have Raiders V4 practice map, Raiders mechanics map, and also polarized mechanics map to all help you improve. So choose whichever one you feel is your favorite. Next up, we can also talk about the tip of high ground awareness, because you want to learn to reclaim high ground effectively within fights, and you can do this through techniques such as ramp flipping and side jumps, which allows you to quickly take high over the opponent. Now if you do lose a fight because your opponent ends up taking high, I want you to look and analyze where and why you lost high ground, and then work on countering those situations so you don't make the same mistakes in the future. Lastly, to improve your building and editing consistency, you want to make sure that you're practicing under pressure. Now you can use creative map designs for this, like realistic turtle wars or realistic 1v1s to mimic in-game scenarios. The more you practice in these pressure scenarios, the more experienced you will be. And we both know that the more experienced you are, the more consistent you're going to be as a result of this. Tip 2 is about map awareness and rotation strategy. Now many of us here are able to get to a decent mechanical skill level, but despite this still fall short when it comes to a scrim or a tournament game. Now a lot of the reasons for this is due to having poor rotation strategies or map awareness. But what exactly do I mean by this, and how can I actually improve it? You want to make sure that starting off you have a consistent landing spot that has enough loot and resources, but also that you avoid overly contested areas so you don't die. It's not just whether your POI is contested that matters, it's also the area around it, because if you're consistently rotating into other players, you're going to get third-partied more. And unless you're practicing fighting off spawn, you're often going to go down. Next, you can look at your early game rotation. You want to make sure that you learn the storm cycles and rotate early to avoid being caught up in the backside of storm or by players gatekeeping and holding you in zone. Now you can look to master your movement tools like your launch pads and kinetic blades to rotate efficiently, but you should know how and where you're going to rotate for every single possible zone pull that comes out of your job. You can also look to practice your positioning by always aiming for high ground on natural terrain that's high, as this allows you to have an advantage in mid and late game zones if you use zones to your advantage. Staying ahead of the storm whilst minimizing exposure to other players, you should be pretty good, and that's why high ground is such an advantage, especially natural high ground that cannot get chopped out. Lastly, you can also talk about reading your opponents. Pay attention to where other players are rotating to predict and then control their movement in contested zones. This will allow you to grief them much more, and if you're again on that natural high ground, you can control who rotates and how they get pressured. Tip 3 is fighting mechanics and playing smarter. Now you and me both know that you have heard to learn to fight smarter hundreds of times at this point. But guess what? you still clicked on this video, which means you must be doing something wrong still and that you need to improve your fighting. Now you can break down improving your fighting in just a couple of key steps. Starting off, let's talk about your cursor placement. Now you always want to keep your cursor at head level when entering into fights or moving through builds. Not only does this ensure quicker reaction times for pre-fights, but it also ensures heavier damage shots if you hit your opponents in the head. Next up, we can talk about peek shots. Now you need to abuse right hand peeks whenever possible to maintain cover whilst fighting. Learn to take controlled pre-shots instead of spraying recklessly, because this is just wasting time and isn't going to gain you anything within the fight. Now don't tell me you already know this and you know to use right hand peeks 100 times, because you've been told it so many times. Because if you did it correctly, you wouldn't take damage, you wouldn't die in fights, and you wouldn't be watching this video. Moving on, let's talk about movement in fights. So you can use crouching, starving, and unpredictable movement patterns to make yourself a harder target during gunfights and harder to predict from your enemy. Combine this with edits as well that don't expect, and you can confuse your opponent and actually psychologically win the battle before you actually won the fight. Next up, we can talk about third partying. So you can learn to identify which fights you can third party to clean up and which fights you can get easily opportunities onto weakened opponents. You want to make sure that you avoid fights that attract too much attention or leave you exposed. Now, just a little tip for you, if you're being third partied, make sure that you position yourself so your opponent is between you and the third partier. This means that they will get pressured and WQ'd and they will be the one that gets third partied instead of you. Moving on to tip 4 is going to be about optimizing your settings and hardware. Now this works whether you're on a console or PC, but do let me know in the comments down below whether you're a console player or a PC player or a Switch player. Now there's 4 different tips which I'm going to give you guys to help optimize your settings and hardware to really see improvement within your game. Starting off, we want to talk about the custom settings. Now you want to make sure that you adjust your sensitivity to suit your playstyle. You may think that the sensitivity you're on right now is the correct one for you, but bear in mind that low sensitivity is better for precise aim in any game, whereas high sensitivity is faster for building and editing. You want to find the balance for you which is perfect through testing both fast and slow sensitivities and working out which one suits you best. Next up, keybinds. You want to have optimized keybinds to optimize your finger movement. Now you also want to consider binds that allow easy access to building and editing without disrupting your movement, as this is the most optimal type of bind you can have. As for frame rates and input lag, you should use a high refresh rate monitor and lower in-game settings to optimize the FPS which you get in-game. And specifically when it comes to endgame, you want to make sure that you disable unnecessary background applications to minimize lag. Now this can all be done through task managers, so make sure you are aware of that if you're on PC. Also keep in mind that you can place stretch res if needed to boost your FPS. I personally used to play and still play on stretch res, and I use 1660 by 1080 and it really helps me out with my frames. Lastly, talking about audio settings, you want to make sure that amplify sound cues like footsteps and chest locations using high quality headphones and special audio settings. Now you might think that what I'm talking about right now is bullshit and you don't need it to improve. You actually do, because without these things you cannot edit, you cannot build, you cannot do anything consistently. A high quality headset is much more important than you think and it will help. So now let's move on to tip number 5, which is going to be reviewing replays and also your mentality. Now in the wise words of Michael Jordan, to learn to succeed, you must first learn to fail. But as well as just Fortnite, because if you take Fortnite for example, you've got to fail, plays badly, make stupid errors and other silly mistakes before you are able to begin succeeding. Now I do have some tips to help you fail less and succeed more, and these may be examples such as reviewing your own games. You want to make sure you're focusing on moments where you died or made a poor decision and look for patterns in your game like bad positioning or rush edits so you can stop doing this in the future. You can then learn to remove these bad plays from your muscle memory, helping to not do them again. Another point could be that you can adapt to your opponents, as every game is different and the players within those games are also different. Be flexible in adapting your strategy based on player behavior in your lobby. You should be able to recognize aggressive players versus passive players and adjust your playstyle accordingly. Now, having a good mindset comes down to factors like staying calm and composed during fights, especially in high pressure situations like the final endgame. For example, good emotional control leads to better decision making, which is only going to be a positive for your game. As well as this, avoiding burnout is also pretty crucial, and you can avoid burnout by doing focused, intentional practice sessions. Maybe they are just 1 to 2 hours long, because these are way more more productive than long, mindless sessions that will burn you out and bore you as well. Take relevant breaks when needed to avoid fatigue, otherwise you will end up quitting and never really see any success within the game as a whole. So now that you know how to improve so fast at Fortnite that it feels illegal, click this video on screen right now, it will help you. Bye.